Hello, hello. Welcome to Fat Mascara, a podcast about beauty culture. I'm Jen Sullivan. Jess has left me to my own devices this Friday, which means I'm nerding out big time. Just get ready for it. We have a fascinating interview. Before we get into that, I would love to ask you to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify if you like what you hear, or if you don't like what you hear and you want to leave some constructive criticism, keyword constructive. You can also leave comments on specific episodes on Spotify. So if you listen on Spotify, right beneath the episode, they'll ask you if you want to leave a comment. I love this feature because you can talk about topics in that specific episode. I read every single one. I reply. And if you're lucky, whether you leave a review or comment on Spotify or Apple, I'll read it on the air. Like this one I'm about to read right now. This one is from Jessie1724. Great interviews. I've been enjoying the most recent interviews. The Christina Nunez interview was excellent. I enjoyed learning about the business side of beauty. Would be interested in listening to adjacent topics. Thanks for all your hard work on the pod. I love listening. Jessie, we love that you love listening. We love you. And we listen. So this is sort of an adjacent topic like that, the business side of beauty. If you are a fan of Science Corner and what goes on behind the scenes in the beauty industry, you are going to love today's guest. It's cosmetic chemist AJ Addae. So we're going to talk about hot topics in the beauty industry on her side of the business: sunscreen regulations, exosomes, which you've probably been hearing more about, the future of clean beauty, no lists, all that good stuff. But let me tell you a little bit more about AJ. I actually met her when we were judges at the Beacon Beauty Awards, and it struck me that she's clearly a chemist. She knows her science, but she's also a storyteller and a marketer. And she gets that side of the business too, which I'll let her talk all about and give you her background when we get into the interview. But just a little bit more, she's got a BS in molecular biology and a master's in chemistry. She's served as a clean beauty expert for Credo. She's worked in journalism and brand partnership. She was also a scientist for the skincare brand Revision Skincare. And in 2021, she founded Sula Labs, a business-to-business research and development lab that develops and tests skincare products and ingredients for beauty brands that are interested in creating products for melanin-rich consumers. Meanwhile, as she's doing all of this, by the way, she's also working towards a PhD in chemistry and biochemistry from UCLA. NBD. Her company, Sula Labs, has created products you definitely know and love and use, but AJ does such a good job of explaining how they do that and how they're a little bit different than other R&D firms you've probably heard about. So I'll let her get into that. Everybody, welcome AJ to the virtual studio. AJ Addae, welcome to Fat Mascara. Hi.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Jen.
This is so exciting. I have so many questions. I feel like I have like an insider who you and I have judged some awards together.
Yeah, we have.
I like your perspective, and I'm so excited to have you on the show. Before I get into like all my questions about skincare, the industry, trends, we have to find out about you. So I heard you wrote a poem in elementary school about the water cycle.
Oh my God, who told you that?
Deep cuts here at Fat Mascara.
Okay. That's crazy. But yeah, that's true.
Wait, first of all, do you remember any of the poem?
I remember it started off with like, I am a raindrop, nice, and like, honestly, I don't remember more than that. But it was very like gimmicky, like sort of a certain cadence that's amenable to like children. It was just about like a raindrop traveling through the water cycle, which I thought was, I guess, cool at the time.
I think this speaks so much to who you've become. You're a creative assignment, sure, but also you wanted to bring our natural world and sciences into it. Was this like, at that age, was science an interest? Like, what was your path?
No, science was not an interest for me at that age. I mean, I found it interesting in the way that I've always been a really curious person, and I like to build things and put things together. But I've actually always growing up been like, I want to be a writer. I'm a writer. I want to be a journalist. I want to be creative. I want to do visual art. And I think that's kind of also what got me into this industry. But yeah, that science, I never saw myself like in a lab coat growing up. No.
I mean, do you wear a lab coat now?
I do wear a lab coat every day. And gloves.
I didn't know how much time you're spending like at the bench versus meeting with clients, but we'll get into that. What about beauty at that age? Was beauty an interest?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like beauty was an interest because of the things that I saw around its shortcomings for just like the ways in which I had to finagle beauty products and like understand beauty from a different perspective. Because what it really was at the time is that darker skin tones just weren't kind of at the forefront of how beauty is communicated and understood and translated. So when I, speaking of childhood, actually when I was like 11, I had like a WikiHow page where I wrote WikiHow articles that got like hundreds of thousands of views about things like how to make lip gloss with cocoa powder and stuff like that for like darker undertones. So it's interesting because like I was doing it for writing and I wasn't actually
Yeah.
really doing a lot of beauty oriented things for the sake of being beautiful. I was just always curious and I kept coming back to this world through just my writing work.
Yeah. So at what point did you decide I'm going to pursue chemistry then? And then from there, cosmetic, like working in the cosmetics industry.
Yeah, so shout out to all the people listening with African parents. You all know the story very well. Where,
Oh, you're first generation American?
yes, I'm a first generation American,
Okay.
born in
Okay.
Texas. Shout out to everyone from Texas too. But yeah, my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. We all know the story. And I pushed back on it really hard. I still do to this day. Like, no, you guys were wrong. But that's what actually pushed me into just studying science as a discipline because they're like, okay, if you're going to go to college, it low key has to be in biology. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll do it, but I'll still get an English minor on the side. So I got an English minor and then a gender studies minor and then like a graphic design. So I went to a university called Northeastern University where they have you do a mandatory internship. And they're 6 months long. You take off time from school, you go work a real job. And I was really kind of sad for a little bit because I feel like everyone around me was working in biology labs at Harvard Med or something of the sort. And I wanted to find my own kind of place too that could inform my career. Like I was still kind of doing this dating dance of beauty and also science, but also writing. At that time, I fully liked to write about beauty. Digital editorship was kind of in my mind. And I found one singular company in the entire co-op database that was a skincare company. And they were actually looking for someone that was head of brand partnerships, maybe like someone that was a little bit more scientifically inclined. That was me. I applied, I got the job. And as I worked that job, and this was at a startup, it was called Sun Daily. It's since been acquired.
So you had your undergrad at this point.
Yeah,
Did
I was
you,
an
right?
undergrad at this
Okay.
point. But I hadn't graduated or anything. It was really just
Was
like a
this an
long
internship?
internship. Yeah, it was a
Okay, got it.
long-term internship. And so, yeah, I did brand partnerships, so I got to meet a lot of brands in the space. I became closer and closer like with working, I guess, with the chief scientific officer over time. And she had come from Harvard. She was a physician scientist. And this was really the place where I saw that, okay, beauty is also a place for science. And science can be cool.
Yay.
And science can be a place to be creative and solve problems. From there, I did research in the biomaterials design lab at Northeastern, studying pigments that can be used for sun care applications. Shout out to Dr. Daravi. And then I graduated, worked full time in formulation and clinical research. And literally ever since then, like beauty science has been my thing.
You, though, started your own lab at this point. Like you're doing your own thing, right? What is Sula Labs focused on? Tell us all
Right.
about that.
I actually left off at that part in the story where, after I had done my job in clinical research and formulation, there was a point in my job when I was like, okay, I see the life cycle of a beauty product. I see how things get from ideation to research to shelf. And one thing that I was really also seeing was how people with darker skin tones were kind of not as valued in the process when it comes to research, when it comes to the people in the lab actually making these products and who does the decision making, and when it comes to actually understanding how certain products interact with darker skin tones. Now, when we think of diversity in skin, there's a lot of diversity, right? There's diversity in skin tones, there's diversity in allergenicity, there's diversity in age, diversity in gender. So this is actually inherently, I think, something that is not just specific to skin tone, but because I come from the purview of darker skin tones, I actively saw how darker skin was kind of neglected in the R&D process just because of a lack of knowledge. So I actually left my job after some time and I found this research grant randomly that said, pick a project that marries STEM and social justice. And I applied for this project off the guise of what would it look like if we did R&D for skincare brands that also mainly focused on serving the darker skin consumer or the melanin-rich consumer or just consumers from Black-owned brands. And that was enough for me to get a set of equipment, a little lab space. I had a friend that wanted me to formulate a product for them because I had that skill set. One client turned into two, two turned into 10, everything just grew. And so now to answer your question, Sula Labs, what we are, is an R&D lab. And what we do is we close inclusivity gaps in beauty through formulation, developing ingredients, and also through clinical testing that specifically understands the melanin-rich consumer and Black-owned brands.
Okay, so besides the color of your skin, what superpowers? Like that is, as a woman who consumes beauty with dark skin, what you would want. But what else has your experience brought to you at Sula Labs that gives you like, I have a unique perspective that you, client, need?
First, I think a good place to start is defining who the client is. Because in talking about Sula Labs, one thing I've realized is that people don't usually understand that beauty brands are not usually having chemists in-house producing products for them, right?
Mhm.
They're usually going to a manufacturer and they're usually telling the manufacturer, this is what I want in my product, XYZ. Manufacturer scales it up for them, boom. So, to answer the question a little bit first, our client is actually beauty brands, not necessarily the consumers of the beauty brands, but it is the beauty brand, right? And by value, there are consumers later down the stream. So, what we bring in terms of uniqueness is data, essentially. Like when it comes down to it, it's data on what people with darker skin tones tend to reach for on the shelves. So, we do a lot of consumer preference testing. We also understand what kinds of trends are going on in beauty that are specific to people with darker skin and also Black-owned brands. We also kind of pivot the way that we understand efficacy, right, through a darker skin person's lens. So, for example, when it comes to brightness, when I reach for a product that markets brightening, what does that mean to me versus what it means to someone with lighter skin tones, right? For me, it means something that also kind of has to do with hyperpigmentation. Whereas, from my understanding, for people with lighter skin tones, it also kind of has to do with redness, which is something that I don't really experience as much. So, we really do take time to parse through what it would mean for the darker skinned consumer to be centered in product development so that it shows in the actual product itself.
And that's not just the scientific, it's clearly the psychology of it all. You're thinking about the
Mhm.
marketing end of it too, of like what she or they need, not just what their
Exactly.
skin's like. Of course, data is your superpower.
Of course.
So once you have that data, and in my head, I wasn't even thinking about the marketing side of it. I was thinking more about like the formulating side of it. But once you have that data, can you give me an example of a project where like how you were approaching R&D is informed by that information that you're bringing to the table?
There's so many of them. So I'm thinking of a specific project where a beauty brand that folks love came to us and they said, we want to make a vitamin C serum. And all they knew was we wanted to have vitamin C. We also wanted to tackle hyperpigmentation. We're not really sure what vitamin C to use or what other kind of aspects of the product would be important, but we know that we want it to tackle hyperpigmentation and have vitamin C. And we also know that we want to test on people to see whether the product is working or not. So we're kind of breaking this down into two phases here, right? Formulation and then testing. Now, in the formulation phase, what our team had to go through is understanding what percentage of vitamin C would be efficacious for hyperpigmentation, what type of vitamin C would be efficacious, and also how can we build in other features to the formula, such as moisturization and hydration, that are really coveted by all consumers, but also a hallmark of kind of efficacy and non-negotiables for darker consumers, right? To not be ashy. Moisturization, I don't know why, but time and time again is the top priority for darker skinned consumers in how they groom themselves. But then also when it comes to hyperpigmentation, we had to make sure we had a formulation that fit in all of these really good goodies and benefits and also spoke to an aspect of making sure that dark spots fade over time in a time period that's actually worth buying the product. And we know that it takes longer to see darker spots fade visibly on darker skin tones than it takes to see darker spots fade visibly on lighter skin tones. So all of these pieces of information had to be factored into the formulation, right? How do we make it stable? How much vitamin C to use? What marketing ingredients to use? How to make sure that it's working, but you're still not having sort of an ashy sort of undertone after you apply it, or that it doesn't dry down so fast, because we know what the consumers of this brand loves. So once we checked that all off, then we went to testing. So with testing, we had to make sure that we put together questions for the survey that really do speak to how all skin tones experience brightening and how they experience hyperpigmentation being faded.
Did you test on all skin tones or just melanin-rich testers?
So actually a large majority of the testers were melanin-rich skin tones. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we worked with the brand to make sure that the questions, as well as the testing population, as well as, of course, providing the product, were all really, informed by what their consumers would love, because we know that this is a brand that has a lot of melanin-rich consumers, right? And it's interesting. Consumers know. Consumers definitely know when a product was made with them in mind. More so when it comes to like makeup, right? Or hair.
Do you think that's like with the marketing, or it's the formula? Like if I gave like a blank slate, just like lab sample, do you think they'd still get the vibes like this is for me?
Yeah, well, so it depends on the product. I think for the average moisturizer, probably not, right? But even then, like if it's something where it doesn't have long-lasting hydration for like the lotions that the Black community might be used to, or like Vaseline is something that's like highly coveted in our culture. Like I think that that's something that the consumer would clock, but not necessarily thinking like, oh, this is because of my skin tone. But there's certain product categories when it's like sunscreen, right? I think that's a very obvious one where that the consumer would clock it and be like, okay, there was no one in the lab involved with darker skin that
right
and
away.
that is the case a lot of the time. So yeah, it is something where marketing and science kind of do fit hand in hand. But I think our philosophy mainly hinges on the sense that it can't just be marketing that drives inclusivity and beauty. It also has to be R&D as well, which is where we fit in.
I have to go back to one thing you said just before we move on, because it affects me and I'm so curious now. You said how long dark spots take to fade, right? It's different on different skin tones. AJ, I burnt myself with a curling iron in July, beginning of July. So here we are, July, August, September, October, like 5 months later, and you can still see the spot on my cheek. What do you think is the like average time that a dark spot takes to fade if you're using the kind of product that you created for this brand, or like the correct ingredients?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. So obviously, like, let's talk about the trauma to your skin that was incited, right? You burned your skin.
Let's talk about your trauma, Jen. Okay, we've entered that portion of the podcast. I'm ready.
We're already at the trauma portion, yes. You burned your skin, right? So I think it's actually a really great example, because when we think of the trauma that we're actually trying to, for lack of better words, correct with dark spots on skin, we're thinking of acne, right? Picking. We're thinking of
post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation from like after a pimple goes away. Yes,
exactly.
classic.
We're thinking about sunburns. We're thinking about sun exposure. So burning is actually, I would say, on the far more like dramatic end of the kind of trauma that would be incited to the skin. So because it's on the more dramatic end, it's going to take a long time to see efficacy there, right? Because it's not just like acne, right? It's a burn. So I would say on the time scale of months, quite a few months, yeah. Because we all have scars that happen at some point in life that we still see today, right? So
no, don't tell me that. It's on my face.
You're going to be okay.
But yes, of course.
Okay.
Surgical scars or a cut or when you got stitches that one time. Sure. But I was like, curling iron shouldn't be a permanent one would hope.
No,
I guess it depends on the degree
one. It should not be a permanent
of the burn.
But also,
okay.
I think it's interesting. I think to your point on like what is actually different, this all kind of boils down to like, is there a real physiological difference in darker skin tones, which I think is a question that comes up a lot. And I think what it really all comes down to also is just melanin. And I think we all hear about melanin. We all know what it is. But the role that it plays in our skin is immensely important because it's a pigment. And pigments absorb light, they scatter light, they reflect light. And that's super important, right? With how we perceive efficacy with our skin. So I think that's something that is a really important part in understanding how our skin can be different, but there's a lot that actually makes our skin the same. It's just the approach that I think is different.
Yeah. You mentioned sunscreen. This
Hmm.
is clearly something that, like, it's hard for women of color to find a
Yeah.
sunscreen that works for them. A, do you think that's true? Look, here I am speaking for you. Do you think that's true? But also, like, what are some of the other products that you're like, I really wish a client would come to me with this? Like, this is what we need right now.
Yes, first of all, I do think it's true for women of color to find good sunscreen options, especially in America, right? I think because of our limitations on FDA approvals when it comes to sunscreen
Oh, yeah.
materials, like I think that's kind of the barrier to entry. But the thing is, there's so many products out there that have filters that aren't going to leave a white cast. Those filters are often at odds with consumer preferences and how consumers understand safety profile. And while I do think there's a lot to be said with what's actually true and what's not true, I do think that that kind of just our FDA oversight and the way that it's set up does ultimately heighten the barrier to entry with how people understand sunscreens and also what kind of sunscreen options that they would reach for. But in short, yes, I do think that it's harder to find sunscreens that kind of blend really
I just
well.
I just had a crazy thought.
Hmm.
Correct. This is just crazy. Okay, you know how our only two FDA approved mineral sunscreens are zinc and titanium oxide, right? In the
Yes.
United States.
Hmm.
Do you think that's because it was white people making sunscreens forever? Isn't that convenient that they're both like white powders? That there's so many minerals in the world of so many
Yeah.
colors that probably have sun filtering properties.
Yeah.
Like
No,
if you
you're
chopped
right.
up cobalt or something, I bet it would protect from the sun in some fashion.
I
I
mean,
know. I just blew my own mind here for a second because I was like, I wonder if that was an inherent sort of just bias in science
yeah,
that they didn't even think to test other minerals for sun filtering
exactly.
abilities.
Yeah. And I mean that's a perfect example of how R&D is really important when it comes to inclusivity because sunscreens are regulated as a drug and a cosmetic in the United States. So if we're trying to tell people to wear more sunscreen because it literally clinically is proven to prevent you from skin cancer, we got to make sure that the options, really do the work. And to your point on other minerals, yes, this is actually true. A
Yeah.
lot of metal oxides do absorb UV radiation, which is the main requirement for protecting the skin from UVA and UVB rays. But, zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, there's been a lot of work into making sure that they're coated properly so that they disperse well into formulations, dispersions that are really suitable for formulations as well. But the truth is, we also just have a really long way to go with creating better sunscreen options that are just aesthetically pleasing, which, by the way, is what my entire PhD dissertation is on. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I'm doing
You
that also.
didn't. This is so exciting. What year are you defending it next year?
Oh my
Are we not
gosh.
there yet?
If you were to ask me this in 3 months, the answer would be yes. 2026 is
So
when
2026.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It always blows my mind when I realize how long it takes to get a PhD and how much work goes into it. I don't know. In my head, it's always like college, 1 year master's, 2 years PhD, and then you're 27 and you have a PhD. And then I know people my age that are like finishing up a
No, it's a
PhD.
long time because you have to be an expert. Not only that, but you have to do
Yes.
experiments and make science work.
I mean, you are an expert on the way to being more of an expert in this field that I think is just going to have such applications for just making people happy and making
Oh,
them
thank
healthier,
you.
which is nice. You know, when you put on a good product, you're like, I feel seen. This feels good. I'm doing something
Yeah.
good for my health.
Of course. Yeah, it's important to me. I mean, expert, I feel like, that's a word that I
Well, if we have any
that's a
potential
hard
clients
word.
listening, of course, you're an expert in that. Like,
Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time.
yeah, whatever you ended up developing, I bet it worked, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, it's a good one.
Speaking of what you're developing, I am curious what you're excited about right now. Like all the ingredients out there, all the latest in skincare. And do you ever do hair care?
Yeah, we do. We do have some hair care projects, yeah.
Yeah, what are you excited about right now?
I'm excited about so many things. I mean, I think that like the beauty industry is really moving into a place where science is really being taken very, very seriously from so many different angles. And I think like science has always been taken seriously in the beauty industry to some extent, right? But seeing the way, like, I know exosomes is kind of on the list of questions
Oh,
here,
yes,
but
I gave you guys, I gave AJ like hot topics I wanted to discuss. Let's get into exosomes. I just
yeah.
it's I you hear it more and more, and I have thoughts, but I was like, let me see what AJ thinks. What's going on with exosomes? Tell us what they are. Tell us why they're exciting.
Yes. Okay. So exosomes. Now, I'm going to kind of take us through a little bit of a journey here.
I
So
love it.
exosomes are really just tiny little, like nano size, tiny, tiny, tiny little delivery vehicles that naturally occur in your body. And they're really just kind of microscopic bubbles that are produced by cells, which contain proteins, genetic information, and other molecules that speak to other cells. They help cells communicate. They help transport materials to other cells. So if you have a lot of speaking between cells, you can perhaps program something to tell another cell, hey, increase the input of collagen, or hey, help with increasing the input of this protein that's really important for the dermal epidermal junction. So this is where it starts to get into the area of they sound really exciting because they help with a lot of what we perceive as regenerative and reparative functions in beauty products. But regenerative and reparative functions fall under the purview of drugs. Because under FDA regulations, if a product has claims that mitigate or affect the structure or function of the body, it's considered a drug and not a cosmetic. So I think exosomes from a scientific perspective are really, really cool, right? There's so many brands that have launched with the technology of exosomes that are actually proprietary to the brand itself, right? Meaning that they've probably spent a really, really long time developing this technology. But the question of where do we go from here in terms of these really exciting innovations in skincare and them kind of blurring the lines between a drug and a cosmetic is ultimately up to the FDA to really decide. And I think as an industry, I'm most excited for how we decide that, where we draw the line, how we understand communicating the efficacy of fun things like stem cells and exosomes that have really great regenerative and reparative properties, but in such a way that is kind of packaged in cosmetic language and positioned as a cosmetic and not necessarily in drug language, which we see a lot of in the skincare industry.
Well, I was gonna say, you said it was the FDA and how we decide. I was like, I think it's the lawyers too, because I know
Girl.
like I am convinced there's two skincare products I'm looking at right now on my shelf
Mhm.
that like if they made the claims that I bet they could make about how effective they are, those would be the FDA would be like, what now? Those are drugs.
Yeah.
So they just back off of it a bit in their marketing and in the language on the packaging.
Mhm.
But in my head, I'm like, well, isn't it still kind of a drug? But it's just they haven't made those claims, so it's not a drug.
Exactly. I think, and that's kind of the case for, well, so no, it's
I
not a
love how
drug for
cool
everyone
about it you
listening.
are. You're like, yeah, that's how it works. But like that weirds me out a little bit, I have to say.
Right. So no, these products are not drugs. Like bottom line, baseline, they're not drugs.
Right.
But
Okay.
when we think of like what a drug is, there are kind of two things that are at play here, right? One, the FDA and regulatory oversight saying this is veering into drug language or this is remaining as cosmetic language. That's like one, the actual on paper. And the second thing is drugs have to have a level of specificity, right? Like structure and function are really important when it comes to the body. And I like to use the example of licorice root extract. I think a lot of brands and a lot of folks regard it as something that's great for hyperpigmentation. Now, licorice root extract contains several compounds and hundreds of molecules in there, right? But there's actually one in there that's specifically important for hyperpigmentation, and that is the one that we all hinge on. Now, if you're drug minded, you would move towards what activity does that specific molecule have on the melanin pathway in our skin, right? That is the thinking, the line of thought for a drug. But the line of thought for a cosmetic is if I put licorice root extract in this product, you may see the appearance of dark spots fade over time, but we're not saying that there's a level of specificity based off of that one molecule in licorice extract. So yeah, that's the line of thinking that I think gets blurred a
Well,
lot.
tie this back to exosomes for me because
Mhm.
how many types of exosomes are they? Because I feel like some brands, it's like they have a little soup that they put in.
Yeah.
It's like the exosome soup. And I'm like, can you tell me which of the things in the soup does what? And they have the clinicals to show the soup is effective, but it's
Yes.
not like they can say it was the chicken, not the noodle in the soup that did the
Yes.
thing. Is that a
Yeah.
bad analogy?
No, 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 no. That's not a bad analogy. So,
Okay.
okay, so this is a good question. Like, how are exosomes actually produced, right? Is kind of where you're starting off.
Okay. Yeah.
So you basically would produce them by cultivating cells that naturally secrete these little nano-sized molecules that send these really important messages to other cells. So cell culture is literally just a fancy way to say growing cells in the lab in specific growth conditions that are specific to human media, right? So human temperature, human pH. So when you think of exosomes, you actually likely want to use ones that are human-derived exosomes, which is also why it's important to kind of be specific, right? In what kinds of exosomes. And I feel like if brands were more and more specific over time, you would see how it veers into drug language. So yeah, there's a soup that they have to keep the exosomes active and make sure that the product itself also conforms to the conditions necessary for exosomes to be efficacious as well. And such is the same for also when we saw the rise of stem cell language, right? Like, oh, we have these stem cells. You have to make sure that also the product and the integrity of the product is important for the activity of those molecules that the marketing is hinged off of. Now, I also wanted to mention earlier, I think I said a lot of brands I've noticed have proprietary soups. And I think it's just because it is a high cost intensive and also high time intensive process to develop something that's unique to the brand. And so whenever you do want to, let's say you launch with a product that has exosomes, having that proprietary nature is really important, right? We have these very specific exosomes that have this very specific function and have these very specific messages for other cells. But, a lot of that is still drug language. So I get conflicted a lot on that.
Tell me this, is anything that is having an exosome, if they're using the true sense of the word exosome, and I do think it's getting thrown around in marketing just to like be buzzy, would it always come from a human-derived cell culture? And just so people know, does not mean there's human pieces in it when it gets to you in the bottle. But are they always human-derived cell cultures?
No, some can be plant-derived.
Okay.
Some can be
Okay, so you're
plant-derived.
getting the exosomes, the signalers from this plant cell that said turn on the chlorophyll or whatever it is, or fade this, and it's the same way. It's these messengers, and you're growing, but it always starts with a live meat, like
Yes.
something that was alive.
Yeah,
Okay,
something with cells
like
that are
you'd
able
never
to
have an
talk.
exosome for like a mineral or whatever.
No, you can't get like an exome from like a cardboard
Okay,
box. Yeah.
okay. That's our new skin right there. We just came up with our new skincare
New
line.
ingredient.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
cardboard box exosomes. Do not put it past people, AJ. The things I see out here, and I'm sure you see too, that people make skincare out of, it's like,
It's interesting.
yeah, one of the other topics I wanted to talk to you about, just because it's been a really top of mind, because I wrote about it recently, but like this idea of, I just keep seeing the ancestral skincare. And
Yeah.
so the exosomes thing, I think people get scared of science. It's complicated. Even just the two of us talking about it and we barely touch the surface. It's like,
Mhm.
whoa, that's amazing that you can put that in a bottle. But people are also like, what else is that bottle? Like they get freaked out about it. Vaccines, like this, there's this, especially in our American culture right now, there's this fear of some of that science. So I see this movement towards not clean and dirty beauty, but like basic and
Yeah.
ancestral skincare ingredients versus these high-tech, lab-derived, biotech kind of ingredients.
Mhm.
Do you feel that as well at all?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that it's something kind of born out of the clean beauty revolution too. Like a lot of founders will maybe come to us and say, "We want to make this really high-powered exosome efficacy like product, but with I don't even know what category of ingredients to call it, like just ingredients with no preservatives, like no parabens, no synthetic ingredients."
The no-nos, yeah.
The no-nos, yeah. And I find myself actually having a lot of talks with founders saying like hyaluronic acid could be synthetic, lactic acid can be synthetic. A lot of the things that we love and know as like structural features of our products are synthetic, and that's okay. That's the job of a chemist, right? To provide synthetic material, even a formula synthetic, right? A water and oil emulsion, like I am synthesizing something, a macrocolloid. So it's hard, right? Because I think we're seeing a lot of the future of clean beauty kind of roll out as a red carpet. And I think one of your questions was like the value of a no-no list.
Yeah, this ties into that. What do you think?
I think it's good that brands have their own internal no-nos. I think that's okay. I think that's totally fine to be like, I want to make a skincare brand and I want to keep my brand, free of these ingredients. Now, the rationale behind why they want to keep free of certain ingredients, I think sometimes does have to kind of go through a little bit more rigorous process of why am I like really scrutinizing? Why don't I want phenoxyethanol, right? What is it about phenoxyethanol? Do I know
Because
about
my
phenoxyethanol?
retailer doesn't want it.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was headed.
Let's be real.
Exactly. Retailer mandated lists, I think, can
Yeah.
be a little bit prohibitive sometimes for brands too. Because now I don't think there's a retailer list that's like, don't have phenoxyethanol, or one that I haven't come into contact with. But I do think that that can be a little prohibitive for brands, right? Because if we establish a larger scale blanket no-no versus individual brand preferences, I think that's when we start to get a little too, unless that big no-no is determined off of really rigorous, all case scenarios sort of research, I think we get a little prohibitive when it's like across the board, no synthetics at all, because it's just not possible.
Yeah. You touched on a couple of things I want to ask about, but the first was the phenoxyethanol. What was the ingredient?
Phenoxyethanol.
Why is that something people don't want?
Sometimes folks, like we have an intake
And
form.
what is the reasoning usually for that?
I honestly am
It
not
sounds scary.
sure. Yeah, I'm truly not sure. Phenoxyethanol is a preservative.
It doesn't show endocrine disruption. It's not like it. No, I'm asking, like, because a lot of these are like, they're not sure, but maybe, and that I can understand.
Yeah. I mean, this is something, well, first of all, phenoxyethanol is a preservative. And from the US FDA's rules, you cannot go over 1%. Like, you can't use more than 1% of this in the formulation. So that's where it's kind of redundant to be like, no phenoxyethanol. Like, there's already regulations.
Okay, I get it. It's like the same thing as water could be carcinogenic if you had enough of it. But I think it's a very simple way to think about things. If you're like, well, if they're capping it at 1%, that must mean because it's bad. So let's just put 0%.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of these like compounds just are long names, like the nomenclature is just long. I think a lot of it is just like a gap in knowledge, and that's totally okay. I think it's okay to have that gap. But I think if you are to just say none of this ingredient, but I haven't done the research as to why I don't want this ingredient, I don't think that's okay.
Yeah, because that just keeps these myths going. And,
exactly.
And all of a sudden, we've never seen a sulfate again. And they're out of everything because everybody's scared of sulfates. I'm curious, as a lab, Sula Labs, does it have its own no-no list? Or are there things that you, whether for ethical reasons, environmental, safety, health, just don't like to formulate with?
No, we do not. I mean, there's certain things where it's like we start with just FDA oversight, right? Like what's not allowed, right? I don't have filters in my lab that are not as US FDA approved for sunscreens, but are like Japan approved. So we go off of regulations. But when it comes to like, this isn't safe, I'm a chemist. And so before I scrutinize a chemical, it's really, really important for me to read a lot of research that the chemical is used in the context that we're planning to use it in. And that's really, like, we're just really going off of safety data sheets, like what the supplier has on hand, taking that with a grain of salt, doing a lot of research behind those sorts of results. But I can't really think of one ingredient that's like, we are never going to use this, because that's just not how chemicals work.
Unless it's something that already the FDA has been like, we're really not going to use that. Okay.
Exactly. The dose determines the poison.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like triclosan for some reason, because it was in a bunch of cleansers I used to use when I was younger. And now I don't think you're allowed to use it anymore in the USA.
Yeah, that's actually a great example. There's actually a lot of like chemicals that we have not really even formulated into products, because by nature of where the industry is moving towards, More people don't want sulfates. Okay, we use sulfates a lot less. I think what we use in the lab is actually just a reflection of where the industry is headed towards. We actually haven't used a lot of parabens in a lot of cases as a preservative because most brands that come to us actually have a very strong baseline of what they don't want, especially if they have aspirations to be in Sephora or if they're already in Sephora and they want to keep their Clean at Sephora seal. From what you said, like we have yet to use triclosan for that reason too.
Do you think, though, that, listen, FDA is busy. They're out here approving drugs, probably getting limited budget. We could even talk about what's going to happen in 2025. Who knows? Do you think they're doing an okay job of vetting ingredients? Because you're saying, like, okay, I know these things are definitely not going to happen. They're not FDA approved for cosmetics in the United States. But do you think there might be some that are slipping through the cracks because there's just not good enough oversight scientifically?
I'm sure. And I actually don't necessarily think this is as much of the FDA's fault as much as it is the fact that cosmetics are something mainly non-men love. This is not just the case for cosmetic science, it's also the case for cancer research. Things that are more amenable to just the lifetime of a woman, for example, are not going to be as well researched. And a lot of questions that are directed towards science or scientists, especially in cosmetics, are simply not as well researched. Because the FDA is more inclined, let's say, to commission a large-scale study on COVID because it's more pressing, right? Like that's something that we're all experiencing on a wider scale, on a global scale, but maybe not as much towards like, what order should I layer my product in order to see efficacy, right? Like they're not as interested in that for reasons that the academic industry, the cosmetic industry just hasn't yet gotten there in terms of how much research is actually behind these questions. So it's unfortunate to me, honestly, because I think too many people have treated cosmetics as an art more than a science. And I think that where we're moving towards is treating it as much of a science as it is an art.
Well, for me, it goes back to that bias that I was thinking about before, because I'm thinking about hair relaxers, which have all sorts of chemicals, not all sorts, a few chemicals that have been shown to have carcinogenic effects and yet are still allowed in hair products. And what I hear you saying is like, they're not doing the research because it's like, okay, well, it's a small percentage of the population that's using hair relaxers and they're women. And frankly, they're probably women of color. And like, it's just not a priority to our country's legislators.
Exactly. And I think
But doesn't that make you mad?
It makes me so mad. It makes me so mad because to that point, what's going on? Like, we need the research. And that's just what it is. We need the research by people who care.
At this point, the research is incoming on that one. Like, do you think that we're going to see them making movement for legislation that's going to limit some of these ingredients?
Yeah. So from like a legislation perspective, I think if there were to be legislation, it'll be quite slow.
Okay, maybe not legislation, but will they be added to an FDA like
a no list? Yeah, I think eventually a lot of chemicals will be added to that list. As like, and I hate to keep being like, as the research, but like what it really is that, I mean, I even see this in my PhD, right? If I were to go try and find a research group from a university level perspective that their whole focus is hair relaxers, it doesn't exist. But if I wanted to find a research group and their whole focus is cell surface receptors and click chemistry, I could find 100 research groups. I think that it needs to be prioritized more so by scientists too. And scientists that also do not like have more training on bias as well. Because, science is not a perfect thing. It's a very heavily biased field too. So yeah, cosmetics unfortunately suffers from all of those things compounded.
We were talking about sort of some of the negative things that are in our industry. I want to talk about some of the positive things, like yes list, like what you're loving right now. Like, how about this? What skincare product's so good you wish you invented it?
Oh my God, that's an amazing question. Okay, I'll start with the Peter Thomas Roth Sulfur Mask, actually.
Okay.
Love this product. I think it's actually OTC, if I don't remember correctly, because there's a lot of sulfur in there. But what I love about this
OTC meaning it's a level of anti-acne medication because it gets a drug effects box?
Exactly, over the counter. Perfect, yeah.
Okay, and why do you love it?
It's so incredibly easily formulated. If you look at the Inky list, there's not a lot of ingredients in there. There's parabens. There's things that aren't necessarily considered clean at a lot of retailer standards. But I think that an expert formulation uses as little materials as possible to achieve a really efficacious effect without having to add all of these bells and whistles that are a result of like prohibitive, let's say, no lists, right? So Peter Thomas Roth went straight to the point. They said, we want a sulfur mask. We want it to be effective. We're going to use whatever materials it takes to make that happen. And that's exactly what they did. And it's so well received and people love it. And I love this product because of that. And it's like a really big size. And I think that's why they're able to offer it really big too.
I feel like we buried the lead. Why do we want a sulfur mask? Is it for the anti-acne?
Yeah. Sulfur mask is
Connect the dots for me.
Yeah, sulfur mask is for anti-acne.
It's so funny. I've had other chemists talk to me about sulfur and how they think it's so underused in the acne market. Why for you is it such a beneficial ingredient for acne? Why do you like the mask?
It works so fast. It works so well. Like you're not going to look like the most gorgeous with this like stinky mask on your face. And I think when it comes to sulfur, there's just a lot of user experience things. Like it has to dry down for it to like really take effect. It's like a metal.
But you find if you have a breakout and you do the mask, those things are going away quicker.
Literally gone. And I have very acne prone skin.
Can you spot treat with it?
Yeah, you can spot treat with it and even area treat with it. I would just wash it off and like use it as directed too if you do spot treat.
Yeah. Okay, so the Peter Thomas Roth sulfur mask. What other skincare products do you think are great or ingredients that you're just like, because sulfur, clear, that was both an ingredient
It's a great
and a product
one.
for us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so good. I love sulfur. There's the Bea body scrub. And I tried that one because of what we judged together at the Beacon Awards for Beauty Independent. Shout out Beauty Independent. I thought this was so well formulated too. Like it's got little pumice granules in there that you can use for your body. Now, it's not like it's a really nice sort of exfoliating clean that you feel in the shower with the strong minty feel afterwards. So I feel really
Wait, remind me the brand name. How do you spell that?
Bea. Well, I don't know if it's pronounced this way, but it's Beia. Lots of vowels.
Okay, so you like this minty feeling.
Yes. And it's so good. It like not only does it make you feel clean, but it's just one of those things where like everyone likes to feel clean, but I know like a really, really strong consumer preference for the Black community is feeling squeaky, whistle clean everywhere. And I think that this is like a product that performs really well among like my friends that are Black and like really love a good squeaky clean scrub.
Squeaky clean scrub. All right. It's good for keratosis pilaris too, that one, right?
I'm sure. I'm sure. I don't have KP, and I try not to make claims about like, certain things. But yes,
but for you,
I would
it's
imagine.
more the sensorial is the reason you're loving it.
I would imagine it would be effective too.
I want to ask what's in your makeup bag, and I also want to ask what you think about devices. Because like skincare, do you have any devices?
I don't. So devices they're actually another one of those things that like there's no real like oversight as to what is a device and what's not, like a skincare device and what's not. So other than like my flat iron that has a comb attachment, like I'm not the most tech savvy in the first place.
Wait, what's your flat iron with your comb attachment? Which one?
Oh my gosh, I got it off of Amazon. So I actually don't remember the brand name, but it's literally like a straightener. That's how I got these like kind of bumped ends. It's like a straightener with like a comb sort of functionality to where you just kind of brush through your hair.
And you just do a little flip and it stays.
Yeah. Okay. It's fun.
All right. That's your hot tool of choice.
That's my hot tool of choice. In my makeup bag, I'm a very simple, very, very simple face sort of person. I'm very much just like a little bit of concealer under the eyes because I don't get a lot of sleep. Some really good mascara. I've been loving the Tower 28 one. And then a little bit of like little boop, boop, boop of blush on the cheekbones, which I use the Glossier in Dawn.
But you can't just, you have to, so the concealer though, before we get to the blush, which was the concealer that you like?
It's like a Revlon concealer. I think it's like just any Revlon concealer, honestly. And then you know what? The reason why is because it's the only one I could find that day in my shade at the CVS. So I've just been using it. Yeah.
Okay. Honestly, shade is, for me, probably 90% of why I like the particular ones, because I just happen to be like, they got a shade that hits me perfectly within their range.
Literally. Yeah.
Now, Now tell me about the blush. Sorry, I spoke over you.
No, it's okay. I've always been a user of the Glossier Cloud Paint and Dawn because I think that works really well, like with my skin tone. Not a big foundation wearer for no reason at all, honestly. I just don't usually wear foundation. I'm a big sunscreen wearer though, and I love the La Roche-Posay. I think Toleraine UV protective sunscreen. That's like been my favorite one for years and years and years and years. Really great finish, and it is not a mineral sunscreen. What? Oh, I brushed my brows with Glossier Boy Brow. I got my brows
Classic.
laminated earlier this year, and when I
What'd you think?
realized, it didn't last that long. And I don't know if I just went to like the wrong place or something, but I realized that like brow pomades actually use a lot of similar ingredients as brow lammies. Obviously, there's like a specific active ingredient that I don't remember in brow lammies that I think are actually just more for just longevity. But once I realized I can just get like the e.l.f. sort of brow pomade and just dip my boy brow in there when it runs out, I was like, I'm just going to do that.
Yeah. Did it change the texture of your hair? Because there are some brow lamination services that use almost like a perming solution, like you would do on someone's hair. Then there are others that are just like a heavy waxy pomade that like
Yes.
freezes it up. What do you think you got?
I definitely got a combination of both because when I was looking at the ingredients of a lot of these, they actually are a combination. A lot of them are a combination of both.
Of course, the chemist did the research. Of
Exactly,
course.
yeah, before I did the lammy. So then I was like, okay, like I looked at the e.l.f. brow pomade that they have. It had the Satirith 25, and I'm going to use the Satirith 25 on
What
a day-to-day basis. It's
what's
just
the
like,
tier 25?
it's an ingredient that you'll find a lot in like edge control gels and like to kind of get like that sculpt, just like a really good sculpting effect. It keeps things in place. It's like polymerized sort of like fatty acid. Not that anyone probably like
It's a
understands what I
no.
mean.
Wait, it's a polymerized fatty acid. Does that mean it's like a wax of butter or something that I would understand,
A
or it's
wax, a
different than
wax.
that?
That's a great way to
It's
put
a
it.
wax.
Yeah, that's a great way to
Okay.
put it.
Tier 25. I've seen it on Inky lists and just never really thought about what it was, but it is in a lot of hair products.
It is, yeah, for like hold. Now, let's say, so here's kind of the crux. Let's say you're trying to make a really good edge gel, but you don't want to use Satirith 25 because that eth suffix is associated with ethoxylated compounds, which we usually see banned at a certain parts per million in Ulta Clean, Sephora Clean. Then, good luck getting that hold as well. And if you don't want to use like other sorts of waxes that may be not vegan or something. So those are kind of like the things that I think around on a day-to-day basis when I do formulations and work around lists.
And the reason they're being banned, not necessarily because they're bad, just because they're on a no list from a particular retailer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. So is there good edge control without Satirith 25?
There are.
Okay. People are
there
working on
are.
it. Okay.
But I mean, I've seen good ones with beeswax, but like, yeah.
Is that a challenge
PVP.
for the formula?
Oh,
okay.
My gosh, yes. Or I'll see good ones with like PVP, but then also PVP is like especially
What's
not
PVP?
something. PVP is basically also seen in like edge controls as well and like hair gels. It's really good with hold. It's also kind of a nice waxy sort of filmy sort of substance.
Okay. I feel like there's a brow pomade or edge control or maybe a dual product in your future. Like this feels like a fun challenge for Sula Labs, no?
There's always a fun challenge for Sula Labs.
Okay.
There's always a
All right,
fun
let's
challenge.
do it. All right. Not to put products on your list that you need to make because there's people that pay you to do that. Okay, let's do the Fat Mascara 5 so I can get you out of here because I've taken too much of your valuable, precious time. Okay, good. So this is just like a little speed round, just fun. What's the first beauty product you ever remember really loving?
This came much later in my life, but I really have to like hats off to Glossier. Every single thing that they made, I was just so enamored by. And I think it actually is the Sephora tween effect now that I'm looking back. So, like they had the boy brow. I have very thick brows. That was like a very early product for them.
Boy brow.
That was my jam. Still is.
Okay, second question. Is there a beauty treatment or service that you just would never do?
Ooh, laser. And I want to do laser, like laser hair removal. I think that's a really cool thing. I'm glad that they started to make laser hair removal devices that are not as painful on darker skin tones. But it still kind of scares me. It scares me personally because of just that history behind it. Also, I will say like tretinoin, like I know it works really well, but just given the like history behind it being used on incarcerated folks to test it out and like nearly killing them, I think is something that kind of deters me from using it.
This is why our podcast is going to be 8 hours long. Excuse me, what? Tretinoin,
yeah.
as in the vitamin A derivative that is a prescription level retinoid,
Yes.
got its first testing on incarcerated people?
Yeah, everyone go take out your Googles and look up the Holmesburg prison experiment where Dr. I believe Alfred Kligman, he was the guy who discovered tretinoin and its perfect like percentage to be used for the beautiful effects that you see on skin today. And he actually ended up arriving on this percentage by testing on incarcerated folks in the Holmesburg prison, I believe in Philadelphia.
It's literally down the block from where I grew up. I know Holmesburg
Really?
prison.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I did not know this.
Yeah, no, it was a really, really big thing.
It's a notorious place, though, for many reasons. But that's a weird, I didn't know about the tretinoin history, and I will definitely look into that.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe one day.
So this is on your no-no list for ethical reasons. Remember I asked you before, you were like, yeah, no, there's ingredients I won't use, just purely ethical. I know it's probably fine, safe and healthy, but I don't like the whole vibe.
The vibe, yeah. Like, is it actually like a no? Like, some days I'm like, some tretinoin really hit today. But, I just, maybe I'll get there one day.
No, or stick to your values. I love this. Okay, let's go easier with this third question.
Okay.
What's your favorite snack?
Ooh, I'm not really a snack person all the time. But when I do, I'm a big fruit girl. I love a good blueberry. Antioxidants.
Oh, okay. Healthy person. Yes. This is a fun new one that I've just put in here, but can you go in your notes app on your phone for me?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And tell me the last note in there. Jess came up with this question and I was like, that's so good. I was like, are people going to not tell me if it's something they don't want to share? But
that is a great question. Actually, I have it here on my laptop.
Show me. Tell me.
Let me pull it up. The last note app that I have in there is someone's email because I made sure to write it down from a panel so that I could email them. Did I email them? It is on my to-do list today.
Okay. That's a classic one. Okay. Last question. If it's 11 a.m. on your day off, what would you be doing?
Oh my gosh. I would be in bed. I'm a big bed person.
Okay, you sleep
love
late.
A good sleep.
Are you sleeping in bed or are you just chilling?
Just chilling. I need to be horizontal. Like,
is the kitty there?
Often. Yeah, with my cat. Mm-hmm.
What's the cat's name?
Her name's Junie, like in Spy Kids.
Junie? I mean, who doesn't want to spend like a Saturday morning at 11 a.m. in bed with Junie? Like,
right?
I get it. Yeah.
Me tomorrow,
that
honestly.
Sounds delightful. Yeah. Good. I want that for you.
Thank you.
This was just I feel like we went on a river, and there were tributaries and we took some of the tributaries, but then we came back. And I hope for everybody who's with us, this was not too wandering because I think AJ and I have a brain where we would go off and talk about these things. And I hope you learned something because I certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much for coming on Fat Mascara.
Thank you for having me. I love this podcast and you're super cool. Thanks to everyone listening too.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
It's your reviews and feedback that help us make the podcast even better. Head over to iTunes to rate and review us or email your thoughts to info@fatmascara.com.
We also want to answer your beauty questions and hear what products you love. To share a Raise the One product review or to ask a beauty question, email us at info@fatmascara.
If you send it as a voice memo file, we can even share your voice on the podcast. You can also do that by leaving us a voice message. Our phone number in the United States is 646-481-8182.
Thanks so much for listening.